Thank you. So I should lower this. Previous speaker was a bit taller, so I hope you had a good lunch. Honestly, I didn't even know after the morning's presentation what to eat anymore, what is safe, what kind of olive oil to use. So I will take these messages home and also try to be a bit more cautious about what to buy. So first, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the exception to speak in English, because the way we work in Brussels in the advocacy and lobby sphere, there are a lot of different industry associations, a lot of different stakeholders, the NGOs, the chemical industry, textile industry, the fragrance industry as well. And we all engage with the European Commission, with the Parliament, with the Council. So those are the ones that are making the laws ultimately. And with our knowledge and with our expertise and with, of course, the interest that is for our industry, we pass on the ideas and the messages and the data and so on. And we are quite spoiled because we do speak English there, so that's why I hope that you will bear with me for this presentation. Okay. I'm pressing the green one, right? Yeah. So I will tell you a little bit about our Cefic work on enforcement and about the industry views on market surveillance and enforcement and why is that important. And one of the works that I'm doing now is I'm coordinating the work on the revision of the chemical legislation REACH. So those of you that are involved, you know that now it's really the pivotal moment for the entire industry, not only the chemical industry, because for the first time in, I think, 15 years since the legislation was initiated, it will be revised. So the Commission is in the process of revising the legislation. And this REACH legislation basically dictates the rules on the safety of the chemicals that are put on the market. And those rules will be much more stringent. And all players need to comply, but not all comply, and that's something that we will see in this presentation and also what we've heard before in the afternoon. But before we jump into the hard topics, maybe just to link this to my favorite sport. We spoke about sports yesterday. Well, actually, it's a nice setting to talk about sports because you will soon host the most beautiful tournament in Paris. And when speaking about level playing field, I always think about sportsmanship and fair play, and it's basically the same as in sports. So all players, regardless of which team you play for, where you come from, where you play, you have to obey the rules. And I hope that also accounts for our daily life as well. But those practices are the same as well in business. So there are certain rules like REACH, like CLP, like the Medical Devices Directive, like the pharmaceuticals, whatever. You need to look at those rules and you need to obey the rules as a business. But what happens is that in practice, in theory, we should all obey the rules. Whether you are also selling offline, so whether you're placing literally products on the shelves, or whether you're selling online, so online platforms should also obey the same rules. But in principle, there are certain free riders that somehow find the back door, and they sell fake products, they sell non-compliant products that are dangerous for health and the environment. And those products also diminish the competitive advantage of the EU businesses, because compliance is not cheap, it's very expensive. And then you have those that don't care about compliance and sell bad products on the market, which makes EU businesses quite mad. So, if we take a look maybe in the present, what we see is that enforcement of current rules is still a big issue. And this data comes from EU RAPEX. It's today called EU Safety Gate. And it's basically a network that has been established at the EU level. It's an alert system where one member state, for instance Croatia, detects a non-compliant product on the borders, and they alert this network, they post it at the EU Safety Gate, so the other member states can also know that this product is bad. So they don't have to chase it around in Europe, but they know that they immediately have to stop it. So it's a nice way to alert the authorities, but also to alert the public. And here what we see is that we have the data from 2021, the data from 2022 are fresh, but I made this presentation with the data that I had at the moment. What we see is that roughly almost 80% of detected chemical non-compliance comes from imported goods. And also what we see is that the percentage of cases where the country of origin is unknown, it's increasing slightly, and it's also has increased as well for 2022. And that is most likely because of COVID, because people were shopping online, it was much easier. So one caveat here, that it's quite of a big number if 80% of detected non-compliance comes from outside the EU, chemical non-compliance. But however, this EU safety gate also looks at physical or mechanical non-compliance. So for instance, it's a sector that I'm quite close to still, the textile sector. If you have a hoodie for a child, you have these cords that are sticking out, and there is a specific standard in the length of the cord, how much it should be. If the cord is longer, it may pose a risk to the child to get entangled and strangle. So there are certain rules for that. So if a customs authority receives this shipment, they see, okay, maybe it's a bit long, maybe I should check it with a ruler. So they check it and they see, okay, it's non-compliant. That means that this mechanical or physical non-compliance is a bit easier to spot than the chemical non-compliance. If something is non-compliant to REACH, usually it doesn't smell bad, usually it doesn't look bad, but you really need to know what you're looking for, and you need to send it to a lab for further analysis. So that's why this data is really underestimated. The problem is much, much bigger, and this is really only the tip of the iceberg. One thing that the national enforcement authorities are saying is that we have, for instance, in one member state, we have good resources, we have the knowledge, we have the tools, we have the IT infrastructure, whatnot, but they across, or another member state doesn't have the same tools. And if one member state is a bit weaker in enforcement, it's easy for the non-compliant goods and for the rogue traders to find a gap and then to pass on these goods. So that means that when it comes to enforcement, it needs to be really coordinated across all member states. They need to act as one. They literally need to be as a football team to play as one player. Otherwise, if one member state is good and another one is not, it doesn't really serve a good purpose. So it really needs to be a coordinated effort from all of them, and they all have to have the same resources, people, and the knowledge to be able to stop non-compliant goods. So this is more of the future. Now, the present. Now, if we take a look into the future, I will not bore you with all the legislation and the different acronyms that we use in Brussels, because we are sometimes getting lost. But what we see, and maybe the companies that are sitting here, is that they are getting more and more legislation on their desk. So we will see in the future more restrictions coming up, so restrictions on chemicals, more legislation on sustainability. Sustainability is now becoming a norm. Microplastics, maybe to mention even PFAS in this, I think it's quite of a pertinent topic in France as well. So rules are becoming stricter and stricter, and it's more and more of them. What we also see is that with the REACH revision and with the whole chemical strategy for sustainability, which is basically a strategy that the European Commission has put up with dozens of action on how to make chemical safety more stringent and how to have more ambitious goals on how we regulate chemicals, sustainability and whatnot, we will see that the restrictions on substances and on the use are going to become much bigger. Again, those companies that have been involved in the REACH revision from the beginning, they know that the restrictions were usually covering 1 or 2 substances at max, but now they will cover much, much more. We will see more imports, including e-commerce, so online sales are booming. Again, to give you a number from the textile sector, 22 billion of pieces of clothing are imported every year. And it's not the upholstery or the curtains or the bed sheets, it's really the pairs of jeans, the t-shirts and so on. And in total 28 billion are circulating in the EU market. So it's a huge number of imports that are being put out there, and plus you count the jewelry, the toys, the electronics, it's really massive. And all of that will increase, but one thing that will not increase, and perhaps also for you, it's the resources. So the authorities are really struggling with resources, the customs authorities are struggling, the enforcement authorities are as well struggling. So we need to do all this with the limited resources that we have, and it's quite of a challenge. Again, to give you a little bit of a picture, I think here, for me, the most interesting one is the increase in the number of substances that are in the scope of restrictions. For instance, we had this restriction on the carcinogen, mutagenic, and reprotoxic substances in textiles. There were 33 substances now that are being restricted. And now in the PFAS restriction a few years after, we're seeing almost 10,000 substances that are caught in the scope. So 10,000 compared to 1 or 2 10 years ago, it's a huge difference. And of course, the percentage of the population that is shopping online is also increasing. So I think we will see more and more restrictions like that, covering thousands of substances. Now, we haven't really talked about online sales, because the online sales are really booming, and especially after COVID, well, during COVID as well, it was just easy to click and to receive your, even from the food to the clothes, straight to your home. And the authorities are now realizing that this trend is boosting up. So they are looking into what are the trends of non-compliance in online sales. So for instance, the ECHA Enforcement Forum. So ECHA is the European Chemicals Agency. It's the implementing agency for chemical legislation. And they have a specific forum with national enforcement authorities called the ECHA Enforcement Forum. And they launch studies, projects, and they launch big projects across all member states. And they recently launched one on online sales, and they detected quite of a high non-compliance when it comes to online sales. The same thing here, this is news from Canada with this pink jacket and leather jacket. It's online sales. It could have happened as well in Europe. It's from a well-known brand that most of the youngsters buy from, probably. It's a TikTok brand, kind of. And it's quite of a high non-compliance to PFAS. The same thing could have been detected in Europe. It happened to be in Canada. Then here with the jewelry and toys, so this is something very interesting that the NGOs, so the Greens are doing. The consumer organizations, they are looking into these mystery shoppings. So basically they buy some products online or in the store, and they test them and they see what are the current trends of non-compliance. And again, you see, just like in the OECD statistics, it's the usual offenders. It's the toys and it's the jewelry. Phthalates in toys, super high, nickel in jewelry as well. Interestingly, these restrictions have been in place for quite some years, and we still see non-compliances coming up. The one that you can't read, it's okay, it's from Croatia, because I just found it on the internet, and I think it's quite interesting because the news was basically alerting the consumers, watch out, because this so-called Nike store is not legit. It's something really strange there, so don't buy there. So there are also stores that are pretending to be legit brands, but they are not. And it's quite of a concerning trend. We spoke earlier about some quite criminal activities that were disturbing, and I want to show you one that, for me personally, is quite of a disturbing one. GBL chemicals. So GBL, it's a substance that it's largely used in industrial settings for production of other important substances. And the companies in Europe, what they usually do is they strictly advise against the use of this substance in cleaners for consumers because of the narcotic properties. Now, there's another criminal stream of activity where they recognize this. It's a good source of a rape drug. So you have a lot of these online shops. You just go on the internet, you Google GBL, and you will be able to buy GBL masked as a rim cleaner, you know, rims for the wheels of the cars. I personally don't drive, so I don't know the price of a rim cleaner, but I checked, and none of the rim cleaners cost 75 euros. So it's very expensive, it's strange. And it's very strange that it says discreet shipping. Why in the world would you hide what you are ordering? If I want to order shoes or something, for me it's perfectly fine that people know that I'm ordering shoes. It is a very shady website. And for me, what is very interesting is that I've been presenting this, for now, this particular slide for over a year. And this website is still up and running, so it hasn't been taken down yet. On the more positive side, we as Cefic, with our international counterpart, ICCA, we have developed a voluntary product stewardship program to prevent this misuse of this chemical. So if there are suspicions from the authorities that they see that this chemical has been diverted into some illegal activities, they are immediately alerted, and also those that are ordering GBL are thoroughly checked. So there are some practices to prevent this misuse. But as you can see, it still remains quite of a big issue. Talking to one of the member companies, they said that they even heard of a trend where GBL is used, basically they put it in an injection, and if you're on the dance floor or somewhere in the crowd, somebody just injects you with that, and then a few, I don't know, minutes or hours, I'm not sure how it affects you, you just pass out. So it's quite concerning. So, back to the legislation part. EU Chemical Strategy for Sustainability. I will bore you with the Brussels terms. The EU Chemical Strategy for Sustainability is something that the Commission proposed together with the EU Green Deal, which is this big communication. I know it's very abstract for you, but it's something that will be translated also nationally as well, and all the member states will be affected. So it's the entire ambitious plan to make chemical safety even more stringent, new rules on how to place chemicals on the market, sustainability, carbon footprint, and so on. And in this EU Chemical Strategy for Sustainability, there are two pillars. From one hand, we see that the legislation will be much stronger. You will have bigger restrictions, so like the one on PFAS, that will become a norm, thousands of chemicals put into one piece of legislation. And they will come much faster. There will not be much time to assess it. So the restrictions are going to be put out there just like that. And then on the other hand, the strategy also says we don't want to see any non-compliance in any kind of way. So the zero tolerance approach to non-compliance. So the question is really these two actions, how do you reconcile the two? How do you somehow manage to achieve both having good, fast legislation, but also legislation that the customs and the enforcement authorities can implement and can digest? And we as Cefic have engaged in the discussion on the chemical strategy for sustainability. We have made our views clear on how to boost enforcement and market surveillance. So for instance, when it comes to restrictions, what happens is that in the Brussels bubble, restrictions are put out there and they think that the problem will be solved. Everybody will be safe, the environment will be safe, and analytical methods will fall from the sky. But as you know, those especially working from the lab, it's not really that easy. And if you want to have a restriction or a law that you can actually implement, you need to have analytical methods and the lab capacity at place. That being said, there are a few cases where the restriction, the law came to place, has been enforced, without a proper analytical method. So we have a case now of microplastics, and we also have a case of skin sensitizers restriction in textiles. And so what happens in the negotiations when the EU lawmakers make this EU-wide restrictions is they involve certain technical committees that are placed in Helsinki. And those technical committees, they assess the risk, they assess the socio-economic impact, and then they check with the enforcement just to see if it's implementable. But what happens is that an enforcement forum, in the case of the skin sensitizers restriction, told them, watch out, because the restriction is so broad, you have so many chemicals in the scope, you don't have analytical methods there, you will not be able to enforce it. And as a matter of fact, you will have less controls being performed. And there was a line in the document that was sent to the European Commission. Now what happened is that the restriction hasn't changed so far. I mean, the Commission said, yeah, thank you very much for that, but we still go on with our restriction. And that should really change. So what we say is that if the enforcement authorities are saying you cannot implement this, you need to have analytical methods, then this opinion should be taken into account and the law should be changed in order to make it actually possible to implement. So that's just one of the things that will be crucial in the years coming up. When REACH was initially written, some 10-15 years ago, I don't think that online platforms were popular. I don't think we shopped online at all. And that's changed now, of course. I mean, and that's why we need to modernize the legislation. So we are also happy to see that the European Commission is now thinking on how to include online platforms in all the chemical legislation, and they're looking into other laws to also make it more coherent with REACH and CLP on, for instance, online platforms being liable for what they put on their platforms, for their sales and so on. And lastly, we need better cooperation between enforcement and customs authorities. So because most of the time we speak about enforcement authorities, but we forget that customs are basically the first line of defense. They are the first people to see the goods on the ground. And what we've heard as well from some other member states is that this communication is not really going well. So the enforcement authorities, which in one member state there are 19 of them, they don't really speak with the customs authorities. So the customs authorities have no clue what are the trends in non-compliance or these high-risk profiles. What do they need to check? So this communication needs to be done much better to understand and better target the inspections, because they cannot inspect each and every container that comes to Rotterdam or Antwerp or whatnot. And the private sector can help there, because we, for instance, as the chemical industry or the textile industry or the fragrance industry, we know our sector the best, and we can help with our knowledge to tell them, okay, this is where you should look. These are possibly the gray areas where you need to pay more attention because you have limited resources. And then towards the consumer, I think the consumers are still not yet informed about what is happening. For instance, I asked a well-known brand in an informal setting, what is the most frequent question that you receive from consumers? And they said, well, consumers ask, do we use chemicals in our clothes that we make? So the consumers are not aware that the things that we sit on, the clothes that we wear, it's made of chemicals. I mean, it's not made of fluffy air. And what I find interesting is that, I think it was last week when I saw a TikTok video, and this lady was basically going to a shop and she was saying this super cheap shop has everything. It has super cheap makeup, and it was some kind of a really borderline shady shop, and she was showing all the shades and it's great and it's in fashion and look at this and look at that. And I was just looking at this video and I said, oh, this is so bad. I mean, this is even promoting even more to buy fraudulent products. But then she turned around and she said, guys, don't even buy this. This is toxic stuff. What are you doing? And this is really an absolutely great way to reach out to the younger population and also to the ordinary consumer, and to raise a bit the awareness of the products. They don't need to know about REACH and all that stuff that we're talking about today, but at least to know, to be informed, where should they buy and what should they avoid. So, to conclude, when we speak about enforcement, it's not only about protecting human health and the environment, and also protecting, of course, the the business competitiveness of the European companies, but it's also about circularity, because if we fail to control the products that are entering in the EU, and we want to make this circularity happen, we're basically contaminating our waste streams, and we are not achieving the goals of the EU Green Deal, and we will not have good products to recycle. So there are many different aspects of why enforcement should be so important. We are fully on board of that, and one thing that we offered as our help, as the chemical industry, is that we could develop analytical methods, and we could also cooperate with other sectors to develop those methods. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope you survived the English presentation, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. And as Mrs. DRMAČ should leave earlier because problem of train this evening, we shall make the question right now for our presentation, and not with these two other presentators after. So who wants to start the question? Yes, Mr. Pelin? Wait a minute, a microphone is coming. Tu peux porter le...
Isn't part of the problem linked to the fact that many countries don't know what reach and its complexity are?
So it was most of the detected non-compliance comes from the imports. The data was extracted, but on that, on the other countries not knowing about REACH, because we always speak about EU legislation and EU rules, and what OECD is doing is great because they're raising the level also to the global level, because if you think about the textile or automotive sector, the production is not happening in one country. The production is scattered, it's global. So we need global rules and global enforcement as well. So they should also be aware and trained, for instance, on REACH, which is not happening. And it's easier if you train the people on the ground so you don't import the problem. So it's definitely also one of the recommendations, but it's more of a task for OECD, for instance.
I have a question myself. We are talking about REACH, but in the future, in the policy of Green Deal and sustainability of the Europe, there is something else, because the REACH check that the product is correct. But in this new deal, it's not only the products which should be correct, it should be also the production of this product. I mean, for instance, we shall have to demonstrate, if we want to import, let's say, methanol from China, that this methanol is made or prepared in the same way that we have decided politically to do that in Europe. How is it possible to check that?
That's, yeah, indeed. I mean, with those global supply chains and complex supply chains, it will be very difficult to trace that and to control that. But on the other hand, I know of this organization called Zero Discharge of Harmful Chemicals, and they are related to the textile sector. And what they do is they train, for instance, in India, in Bangladesh, in the producing countries on how to better manage chemicals in the production as well, so you avoid the problem. And they also train them on REACH. So it's also one of the solutions where you have these people on the ground to train. But it's indeed, I mean, if enforcement of, for instance, articles, what the national authorities are saying, that's the most complex one.
Because most of the European policy at the moment is going to that direction. How is it possible when you have a sample of methanol in front of you that this sample has been made in the proper way? Because the methanol is the same, made in Italy or in China, it's the same. But except maybe we have some analytical solution, but I don't think so. Except maybe in certain cases isotope, but
probably not.
So this is a policy which will be impossible to implement. So for the future, it's really a problem that I don't know if some of you have a comment on that. No. Well, other questions? So there is no longer. I have another question myself. Sorry. You say at one moment that a part of the products that you have found which are not correct are coming from unknown countries. How is it possible? unknown. You know from where is coming the product?
Yeah, indeed. So on the product, it doesn't say where it comes from, and most likely this is due to online sales because there is no country of origin indicated, and this spike is probably because of the COVID and people ordering online more and more, and you just find a website, you look for something, and you just order online, but you have no clue where it came from.
But that is not possible for large amount. It's just possible on small products that you buy on.
Indeed,
because normally, if you buy a truck of a product, you more or less know from where it's coming. Otherwise,
this is more for small parcels, so for personal interest. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, if it's fine, we thank you very much, and thank you to be coming for us.